Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe. We are so happy to have you here with us today for another deep and meaningful conversation. This podcast is designed to support you in learning English while also giving you clear insights into the most important events in the world. Every episode we create combines simple but powerful language with global issues that shape our lives, helping you listen, learn, and think about what is happening beyond your own borders.
Today we turn our attention to a very important story, the recent meeting between US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Around the world, people are asking if this meeting could change the direction of the war in Ukraine. This war has already brought terrible destruction, displaced millions of people, and challenged international stability. When two leaders like Trump and Zelensky sit down together, every word and every gesture carries heavy weight.
This matters because both men represent very different positions and responsibilities. President Trump is now leading the United States once again, and his choices about military aid and diplomacy will directly shape Ukraine's future. President Zelensky is a wartime leader who must secure as much support as possible for his country's survival. Their meeting is not just about handshakes or photographs. It is about weapons, strategies, alliances, and the hope for a possible change in the conflict's long and painful course.
And this is why, dear listeners, it is essential for us to understand the meaning of such a meeting. For Ukrainians, it could mean hope for stronger support or fear of being left behind. For Americans, it could raise questions about how much involvement their country should continue to have in the war. For Europeans, it could signal either renewed unity or possible division. And for Russia, it will be watched as a sign of what future resistance or negotiation they might face.
Before we go deeper into the details, we would like to kindly ask you for your support. If you enjoy learning English through our podcasts and want to keep up with the world's most important topics, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel, The English Globe. Your support helps us grow and bring you more valuable content that combines language practice with international awareness in a simple and powerful way.
We also want to hear from you, dear listeners, because your opinions matter to us. Please write a comment below and tell us where you are listening from. Are you joining us from Europe, America, Asia, Africa, or somewhere else in the world? And more importantly, share your thoughts on today's big question. Do you think President Trump and President Zelensky's meeting will truly change the direction of the war, or will it end up being mostly symbolic?
This podcast is not just about us speaking. It is about building a global community of learners and thinkers. Your ideas and perspectives can help make our discussions more interactive, more meaningful, and more connected. So, as we continue exploring this meeting and its possible impact, remember to join the conversation in the comments and let your voice be heard. Together we will learn, reflect, and think about one of the most pressing issues in the world today. To truly understand the weight of this latest meeting, dear listeners, we need to go back and look at the history between President Trump and President Zelensky. Their relationship has not always been simple or straightforward, and in fact, it began under a cloud of controversy. When Zelensky first came to power in 2019, he was still a new and inexperienced leader on the global stage, while Trump was already a well-known and often unpredictable figure in international politics. Their early interactions revealed both opportunities for cooperation and deep challenges of trust.
That's right, Adam. In 2019, one of the most famous and controversial events between these two men took place, the phone call that shook Washington and Kiev. During that call, Trump asked Zelensky to investigate political opponents in the United States, and this conversation later became the center of an impeachment process against Trump. For Zelensky, this moment was not just about American domestic politics. It placed him and his country directly in the middle of a storm. This early history left scars and raised questions about whether Zelensky could fully trust Trump as a reliable partner.
And this is critical to remember, dear listeners, because even though that event happened years ago, the memory still shapes how both leaders view one another today. For Trump, Zelensky has always represented a leader who is in need of American support, but not necessarily someone to whom unconditional aid should be given. For Zelensky, Trump has represented a powerful ally who is capable of great support, but also a leader who may demand loyalty or concessions in return. This delicate balance is what continues to influence their interactions now that Trump is back in the White House.
At the same time, it is important to recognize that history is not just about conflicts and controversies. Trump did, during his first term, approve some forms of military aid to Ukraine, even though he often questioned the cost and the long-term strategy. Those decisions provided Ukraine with weapons that became important in the early stages of the war. So while there were tensions and mistrust, there was also some cooperation. The relationship between these two leaders has always been a mix of suspicion and necessity, shaped by both politics and war.
Exactly. And that mix of suspicion and necessity is what makes this latest meeting so fascinating. On one hand, we know from history that Trump will not simply give support without conditions. He sees foreign aid as a transaction, something that must bring benefits to the United States. On the other hand, Zelensky cannot afford to walk away without trying to secure as much help as possible, even if it means managing a difficult relationship. This dynamic, built on years of complicated history, is what creates the tension behind their meeting today.
Another important aspect of history that we should mention is how both leaders have viewed each other in public. Zelensky, for example, has always tried to show respect toward Trump, even during the difficult times of the impeachment controversy. He knew that publicly criticizing Trump could endanger the support Ukraine desperately needed. Trump, meanwhile, has often presented himself as someone who admires Zelensky's courage, but also questions why America should pay such a high price for another nation's war. This duality of respect and skepticism has shaped their story.
Dear listeners, this shows us something important about politics and leadership. Relationships between leaders are never just personal. They are always tied to national interests, public opinion, and historical events. In the case of Trump and Zelensky, we see how a phone call, a political scandal, and years of war have all come together to define the way they look at one another. Understanding this history helps us see why their current meeting is not just another handshake. It is the continuation of a story that began years ago, filled with tension, risk, and possibility.
And when we look at this history, we can also see why Zelensky might approach the current meeting with caution. He has learned that while Trump can be supportive, he can also be unpredictable. He knows that trust cannot be built overnight, especially when the past has included moments of disappointment and political drama. At the same time, Zelensky also understands that as long as Trump holds the presidency of the United States, he cannot afford to ignore him. For Ukraine, history is not just a lesson, it is a warning about the delicate path of diplomacy.
This brings us to an interesting question, dear listeners. How much does history really matter in the present? Some analysts believe that the past controversies between Trump and Zelensky will continue to cast a shadow over their relationship. Others argue that war changes everything, and that leaders sometimes have to put aside old disputes when survival is at stake. What do you think? Should history be seen as a burden that limits trust, or as an experience that can help leaders avoid repeating mistakes in the future? We would love to hear your answers in the comments.
Yes, please let us know, because your perspective helps us understand how people around the world are interpreting these events. For us, history provides the background that makes the present moment meaningful. Without remembering that first phone call, the impeachment crisis, and the early moments of mistrust, we cannot fully appreciate why this current meeting is such a big deal. It is not happening in isolation. It is happening in the shadow of years of complicated relations between two men who represent very different roles in this ongoing war.
To understand the importance of the Trump-Zelensky meeting, dear listeners, we also need to examine President Trump's current political position inside the United States. Trump is not only the leader of the country, but also the central figure in a deeply divided political landscape. His return to the White House has energized his supporters, who see him as a strong defender of national interests, while at the same time worrying his critics, who fear his approach could weaken alliances or change long-standing commitments abroad.
That is a key point, Adam. Within American politics, Trump is shaping every debate about foreign policy, including the war in Ukraine. On one side, many members of his party argue that the United States should reduce its role in foreign conflicts, focusing instead on domestic issues like the economy, immigration, and security at home. On the other side, there are voices who believe that if America steps back too far, it risks losing influence and allowing rivals such as Russia and China to grow stronger. This debate defines Trump's political environment today.
Another important detail is how Trump presents himself to the American public. He often speaks with confidence, saying that he can end the war in Ukraine quickly, sometimes even suggesting that negotiations could be reached within 24 hours if he were leading the talks directly. While many experts doubt such claims, they are very appealing to his supporters, who want fast solutions and less spending abroad. For Zelensky, these promises are both a sign of hope and a reason for concern, because quick deals may not fully protect Ukraine's interests.
Exactly. And when we talk about Trump's political position, we also need to think about how much influence he has over Congress. As president, he must work with lawmakers to approve budgets and military aid packages. Some members of Congress are loyal to him and willing to follow his lead, while others are cautious, fearing that too much support for Ukraine might upset voters at home. This balance of power means that Trump's words and decisions are not only personal, but also a reflection of the larger struggle within American politics.
Dear listeners, this explains why the Trump-Zelensky meeting is not just about two men talking. It is also about the wider American political stage. Every statement Trump makes to Zelensky will also be heard by members of Congress, media commentators, and millions of voters. In this way, his political position at home directly shapes his ability to influence the war abroad. If he feels strong in domestic politics, he may offer bold support or tough conditions. If he feels weaker, he may hesitate, avoid commitments, or look for fast exits.
And we should not forget the upcoming elections either. Even though Trump is currently president, his party is always thinking ahead to future votes. How Trump handles the Ukraine issue will play a role in shaping his image as a leader. If he is seen as strong and decisive, it could boost his popularity. If he is seen as weak or confused, it could hurt him. For Zelensky, this creates both an opportunity and a risk, because his fate is tied to how Trump's political choices are judged by the American people.
This is where things become very interesting, dear listeners. Because while Trump is trying to maintain a strong political position at home, he also knows that his decisions about Ukraine will be judged internationally. Allies in Europe are watching closely, waiting to see if America under Trump will stay committed to NATO and continue to pressure Russia. At the same time, rivals such as Russia and China are analyzing whether Trump's America will remain firm or pull back. In this way, Trump's political position is not just national, it is global.
Exactly, Adam. And that global dimension makes his meeting with Zelensky even more significant. For Ukrainians, Trump represents the possibility of either continued support or a sudden change in direction. For Europeans, he represents the strength or weakness of the Western alliance. For Americans, he represents the leader who must balance domestic demands with international responsibilities. And for Trump himself, every decision reflects back on his central promise to put America first while still trying to manage a dangerous conflict far from US borders.
This also raises a deeper question, dear listeners. What does Trump really want from this war? Some say he wants to prove that he can achieve peace faster than any other leader. Others believe he wants to reduce American costs while still appearing strong. And still others think he might use Ukraine as a bargaining chip in larger negotiations with Russia or Europe. Whatever the case, his current political position gives him both power and responsibility, and Zelensky must carefully calculate how to respond.
And this calculation is not easy, because Zelensky cannot simply wait for clear answers. He must plan for every possibility: that Trump could increase support, reduce support, or even pressure Ukraine into making compromises it does not want. This uncertainty reflects Trump's political style, which is often bold, sometimes unpredictable, and always closely tied to the mood of his supporters. For Ukraine, this means walking a fine line between securing promises and avoiding traps. For the world, it means waiting to see what direction America will truly take.
Julia, when we look at the meeting between President Donald Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky, we need to break it down into layers. The first layer is political, because both leaders come into the room with strong domestic pressures. For Trump, his voters expect him to show leadership on the global stage while also protecting American interests. For Zelensky, his people need reassurance that the United States will not abandon them in the middle of a war that has already taken countless lives and destroyed cities. This political tension shapes how the meeting unfolds.
Absolutely, Adam. And beyond politics, there is the second layer, the symbolic meaning of this meeting. Think about it. When two leaders meet during wartime, the images and the words they share carry huge weight. Even if no new agreements are signed, the simple act of sitting together sends a message to the world. For Ukraine, it says they are not alone. For Russia, it shows that America is still deeply involved. For Europe, it's a reminder that their security depends on what happens in Kyiv and Washington. Symbolism, in this sense, can be as powerful as weapons.
That's a great point, Julia. The third layer we must consider is the military side. Everyone is asking, will Trump give more weapons, more training, or more financial support to Ukraine? If yes, it could extend Ukraine's ability to resist and push back against Russian forces. If no, it might weaken their morale and embolden Russia to push harder. The decisions made in private rooms, away from cameras, could shift the balance of power on the battlefield. And when the balance shifts, the direction of the war can change in unpredictable ways.
Right, Adam. And let's not forget the global implications. We live in a connected world where one meeting can influence stock markets, energy prices, and even food supplies. Ukraine is one of the world's biggest exporters of grain, and the war has already disrupted global trade. If the Trump-Zelensky meeting signals stronger cooperation, markets might stabilize a little. If it signals division or hesitation, uncertainty could rise. And uncertainty always hits ordinary people hardest, from farmers in Africa to families in Europe paying high energy bills.
Julia, I think what makes this meeting especially fascinating is timing. Timing in politics is everything. Trump is meeting Zelensky at a moment when both leaders face big tests. Trump has to show his supporters at home that his foreign policy has direction, and Zelensky has to convince his people that help is not running out. If the meeting succeeds, it could be remembered as a turning point. If it fails, it could go down as a missed opportunity that shaped the outcome of the war. Timing makes this more than just another diplomatic photo op.
And Adam, we should also talk about the human side of all this. When leaders meet, we sometimes forget that behind every handshake are millions of lives. Ukrainian families are still living in bomb shelters, children are missing school, and soldiers are fighting on the front lines every day. For them, this meeting isn't abstract. It's about survival. It's about whether they will have enough support to keep defending their homes. And for American families, it's about whether their sons and daughters in the military might be drawn deeper into a conflict overseas. The human side is always the most important.
That's so true, Julia. I also think we need to examine how Russia interprets this meeting. Putin will watch every word, every gesture, and every signal. If he sees unity, he may think twice before escalating further. If he sees weakness or division, he may feel encouraged to press harder. So, the Trump-Zelensky meeting is not just a conversation between two leaders, it's a strategic message directed at Moscow. In international relations, what is left unsaid can be just as powerful as what is said.
Exactly, Adam. And speaking of messages, the rest of the world is also paying close attention. Countries in Europe, Asia, and even Africa are trying to decide where they stand. Many of them don't want to choose sides, but they are forced to react to what big powers do. If Trump shows strong support for Zelensky, it may push some countries closer to Ukraine's side. If not, it could lead to hesitation, neutrality, or even quiet alignment with Russia. This is how one meeting can ripple across continents.
Now let's think about the future. Suppose this meeting leads to more weapons and more aid for Ukraine. That could strengthen Ukraine's ability to resist and maybe even regain lost territory. But it could also risk prolonging the war, making it bloodier and more expensive. On the other hand, if Trump pushes for negotiations or compromise, that might shorten the conflict. But it could also mean Ukraine has to give up something important. These are not easy choices, and they show why this meeting is so important for the direction of the war.
And that's the heart of the matter, Adam. The Trump-Zelensky meeting is not about one day. It's about shaping months and even years ahead. Will this war continue in its current form, with battles and destruction? Or will the path start to bend toward negotiation and peace? No one knows the answer yet. But what we do know is that history has turning points. And sometimes those turning points happen not on the battlefield, but around a table, in a room where leaders sit and talk. This might be one of those moments.
Julia, when we analyze the Trump-Zelensky meeting, one of the most critical angles is the military and strategic implications. Ukraine's ability to defend itself heavily relies on external support, especially from the United States. Every promise of weapons, training, or financial aid has a direct impact on the battlefield. For Zelensky, securing strong commitments is urgent because delays or uncertainty could affect military operations and morale, influencing both short-term outcomes and long-term strategy.
Exactly, Adam. The stakes are incredibly high because this is not just about supplying equipment, it's about timing and reliability. Troops on the front lines need resources immediately, and logistical delays can cost lives and territory. Zelensky has to ensure that any commitments made are actionable and rapid. At the same time, Trump must balance domestic expectations, political considerations, and international optics. This creates a delicate negotiation where strategy, perception, and human lives intersect.
Another dimension is the message it sends to Russia. Putin and his advisors watch every meeting closely, analyzing gestures, words, and promises. If Trump signals unwavering support for Ukraine, it could act as a deterrent. Conversely, hesitation or ambiguity might embolden Russia to take more aggressive steps. Zelensky's challenge is to secure tangible outcomes while also signaling to Russia that Ukraine has strong backing, ensuring that diplomacy and deterrence work simultaneously.
Yes, and the European response is equally important. Many European countries are providing weapons, money, and training, but their commitment is often linked to American leadership. If Trump clearly backs Ukraine, Europe may increase support, reinforcing NATO unity. If signals are mixed, hesitation or divisions could emerge, weakening collective efforts. This interconnected web shows how one meeting in Washington can ripple across Europe and affect global strategic decisions, influencing both alliances and military operations.
Additionally, the human dimension cannot be overlooked. Millions of Ukrainians face destruction, displacement, and daily danger. Every decision made in this meeting impacts civilian safety, access to essential services, and the hope of returning to normal life. Strategic and military decisions are never abstract. They affect real people, families, and communities. For Trump and Zelensky, considering human consequences is as important as weighing weapons, budgets, and alliances.
Finally, Adam, this meeting could shape the trajectory of the war itself. A strong, coordinated approach may allow Ukraine to regain territory and strengthen defenses, but it could also prolong conflict if it escalates tensions. Conversely, pushing for negotiations might shorten hostilities but require difficult compromises. The stakes involve strategy, survival, and global perception, making this meeting a crucial moment that could influence both immediate actions and the long-term outcome of the war.
So, dear listeners, as we reflect on the military and strategic implications, consider all the layers: battlefield impact, Russia's response, European support, and civilian consequences. This is why the Trump-Zelensky meeting is more than a political event. It is a turning point with consequences that may shape the war, alliances, and lives across continents. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. How do you think the meeting will affect Ukraine's strategy and the global balance of power? Julia, when we look at the Trump-Zelensky meeting, one of the most important aspects is its global diplomatic impact. This meeting is not only about the relationship between the United States and Ukraine, but it also sends a clear signal to countries around the world. Allies and adversaries alike are paying attention, trying to interpret every gesture, every word, and every subtle nuance. The meeting could influence not only the immediate situation in Ukraine, but also the broader balance of power in Europe, the Middle East, and beyond.
Exactly, Adam. Diplomacy works in layers, and this is a perfect example. European countries have already been providing support to Ukraine, but their willingness to continue or increase that support often depends on America's leadership. If Trump demonstrates strong commitment, it could reinforce NATO unity and strengthen European confidence. Conversely, if the signals are mixed, hesitation could spread across capitals in Europe, affecting not only military aid, but also political alignment and strategic decisions that impact the broader conflict.
Another critical dimension is the message it sends to Russia and other major powers such as China. Putin, for example, will analyze every detail to gauge the level of U.S. commitment. Strong support could act as a deterrent, signaling that further escalation could lead to significant consequences. Weak or unclear signals, however, might embolden Moscow to press harder. Similarly, China observes these interactions to understand how U.S. influence is shifting globally and to anticipate potential economic or military adjustments they may need to make in response.
And Adam, it's also essential to consider global economic implications. The war in Ukraine has already disrupted energy markets, grain supplies, and global trade routes. Any outcome from this meeting that changes the perception of stability can directly impact prices of oil, gas, and food around the world. Countries dependent on Ukrainian grain, for example, are monitoring whether the conflict might intensify or de-escalate. Even minor signals from this meeting could influence investor confidence, market stability, and the economic strategies of nations thousands of miles away.
Right, Julia. In addition to markets, this meeting has implications for global alliances. The United States has traditionally been a central player in international coalitions, and the way Trump handles this situation can affect the credibility of America as a partner. If he demonstrates leadership and decisiveness, allies may continue to align closely with U.S. strategy, not just in Europe, but in other regions like the Middle East and Asia. If he appears hesitant or inconsistent, it could create gaps that other nations might exploit for their own interests.
And let's not forget about humanitarian diplomacy. Millions of civilians in Ukraine rely not only on military aid, but also on international support for food, healthcare, and reconstruction. Decisions made in this meeting, even indirectly, will shape how the world approaches humanitarian assistance. If strong commitments are made, aid programs can be expanded and more lives can be saved. Weak or ambiguous signals might slow down the delivery of critical resources, leaving civilians exposed to ongoing hardship and insecurity.
Another point, Julia, is that global perceptions of leadership are at stake. Other countries are constantly evaluating how seriously the United States takes international agreements and crises. If Trump is seen as a reliable and strategic partner in this meeting, it reinforces American influence worldwide. On the other hand, if the meeting produces unclear commitments or mixed messages, it could reduce trust in U.S. leadership. For Zelensky, this is also significant, because he must ensure that Ukraine's allies remain confident and willing to act when needed.
Adam, one more layer to consider is the long-term economic consequences of war. Beyond immediate aid and military decisions, this conflict affects trade, investment, and global supply chains. Energy prices, grain exports, and regional stability in Europe all depend on how the United States and its allies manage their commitments. Strong leadership from Trump could stabilize markets and encourage investment in affected regions. Weak leadership could increase volatility and uncertainty, impacting economies far beyond Ukraine and America.
Absolutely. And let's think about soft power, Julia. International perception of the United States as a moral, strategic, and reliable partner can influence alliances for decades. The Trump-Zelensky meeting is observed not only by governments, but also by citizens worldwide. Demonstrating strong support for Ukraine could enhance U.S. credibility, encourage global cooperation, and signal a commitment to international norms. Conversely, perceived indecisiveness or prioritization of domestic politics over global responsibility could weaken America's influence over time.
And the ripple effects extend to conflict resolution and diplomacy in other regions. Countries facing internal conflicts or border disputes are observing how the U.S. interacts with Ukraine. If Trump's leadership is perceived as firm and fair, it may deter potential aggressors and encourage negotiations elsewhere. If uncertainty prevails, it could embolden authoritarian regimes or non-state actors to test boundaries, knowing that international response might be slow or inconsistent. The global consequences are extensive.
Finally, Julia, the Trump-Zelensky meeting highlights how interconnected diplomacy, economics, and security are. Every decision carries multiple layers of impact, from local military outcomes to international trade, humanitarian aid, alliances, and global stability. For ordinary people in Europe, Asia, Africa, and beyond, these decisions shape daily life, energy costs, food prices, security, and confidence in leadership. This is why understanding the broader global implications is essential, not only for policymakers, but also for engaged citizens everywhere.
So, dear listeners, as we reflect on the global diplomatic and economic impact of this meeting, think about all the layers we have discussed: alliances, markets, humanitarian aid, perceptions of leadership, and long-term stability. One meeting, one conversation, and one set of decisions can ripple across continents, affecting lives, economies, and the global balance of power. Please share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think the outcomes will shape global diplomacy and international economics in the coming months?
Julia, one of the most critical angles to consider in this discussion is Russia's perspective. Every move, word, and signal from Trump and Zelensky is being closely analyzed in Moscow. Putin's strategy has always relied on understanding not just military capability, but also political will and international resolve. If Russia perceives the meeting as a demonstration of strong U.S. support for Ukraine, it may force Moscow to reconsider or slow down its operations. If the signals appear weak or ambiguous, Russia might interpret it as an opportunity to escalate military actions or apply political pressure.
Absolutely, Adam. Russia's reaction is shaped by both perception and reality. Putin needs to assess whether America is fully committed to Ukraine's defense and whether European allies will follow suit. This analysis influences decisions on troop movements, territorial strategies, and negotiation tactics. Additionally, Russia must calculate the risk of international sanctions, further diplomatic isolation, or potential economic repercussions if it misjudges the strength of the US-Ukraine alliance. In this way, the Trump-Zelensky meeting carries weight far beyond the two leaders in the room.
And Julia, we should also think about Russia's internal politics. Decisions made by the Kremlin are influenced not only by military strategy, but also by domestic perception. Putin must show strength to maintain political legitimacy and public support at home. If the meeting signals unwavering U.S. support for Ukraine, it could create a domestic narrative in Russia that portrays Moscow as being under pressure from powerful external forces. On the other hand, if Trump's stance seems uncertain, Putin may claim that Russia is successfully resisting international interference, reinforcing his position internally.
Another layer is the economic dimension for Russia. The war has already strained Russia's economy through sanctions, trade restrictions, and financial pressures. Russia closely monitors whether U.S. actions, including military and financial support for Ukraine, might tighten these economic constraints. Strong commitments from Trump could worsen the situation for Russia, forcing Moscow to adjust both its domestic economic strategies and its international financial planning. Weak or inconsistent signals might provide temporary relief, but could embolden riskier military maneuvers.
We also cannot ignore the psychological factor, Julia. Military and political decisions are influenced by perception as much as by reality. If Russia believes that the United States and its allies are united and determined, it may lead to caution or even negotiation. If it senses division, hesitation, or distraction in Washington, Moscow may interpret it as a window of opportunity. In this sense, the Trump-Zelensky meeting is a psychological battlefield as much as a diplomatic one, with every word scrutinized for hidden meaning and intent.
That's a great point, Adam. And we must also consider the regional influence of Russia's reactions. Neighboring countries, many of which rely on European and US support for security, are observing closely. Decisions made by Russia in response to this meeting can influence border security policies, military preparedness, and refugee strategies. A strong Russian reaction could trigger wider regional instability, while a cautious approach might stabilize the surrounding nations and reinforce international norms.
Julia, another aspect is the possibility of strategic miscalculation. Both sides are navigating highly complex scenarios with enormous consequences. If Russia misreads Trump's intentions or Zelensky's commitments, it could either escalate the war unnecessarily or miss opportunities for negotiation. Conversely, if the United States and Ukraine misjudge Russia's response, they could face unexpected aggression. The stakes are immense because a single misstep could have ripple effects across the region, and even globally.
Exactly, Adam. And Putin's international alliances also play a role. Russia is aware of how other global players, such as China, Iran, and Turkey, perceive the meeting. These countries observe US resolve and may adjust their own foreign policies accordingly. If the Trump-Zelensky meeting is interpreted as a demonstration of strong, united Western support, it may influence Beijing or Tehran's calculations in other regions. If it is ambiguous, these nations might test boundaries, seeing opportunities to advance their own strategic objectives.
Finally, Julia, the human dimension remains at the core. Russian citizens, soldiers, and families are also affected by how Moscow interprets this meeting. Decisions regarding troop deployments, military operations, or negotiations are not abstract. They impact lives, resources, and national stability. The Trump-Zelensky meeting, therefore, has cascading consequences. It influences Russia's strategy, its domestic politics, regional stability, and the global perception of leadership, all while affecting ordinary people on both sides of the conflict.
So, dear listeners, as we reflect on Russia's perspective, consider how deeply interconnected global actions are. Every decision made by leaders reverberates across borders, affecting military strategies, diplomacy, economics, and human lives. Russia's interpretation of the Trump-Zelensky meeting could either escalate tensions or create openings for negotiation. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. How do you think Russia will respond, and what impact might it have on the war and global politics?
Julia, as we continue analyzing the Trump-Zelensky meeting, one of the most critical aspects is how Europe and other global allies interpret the outcome. The decisions made in Washington are closely watched in capitals across Europe, from Berlin to Paris to Warsaw. European nations have been actively supporting Ukraine with weapons, financial aid, and humanitarian assistance. Their willingness to maintain or increase this support often depends on how strong and decisive U.S. backing appears to be. Strong signals could reinforce NATO unity and encourage deeper cooperation, while ambiguous or hesitant signals might create divisions or slow down the pace of aid.
Exactly, Adam. The European reaction is not only about military support, but also political alignment. Leaders in Europe are aware that their citizens are concerned about energy prices, inflation, and security threats related to the war. A clear message from Trump supporting Ukraine may help reassure European populations that their countries are aligned with a coordinated, strategic plan. Conversely, mixed messages could lead to public uncertainty, political debates, and hesitation in committing further resources, which may weaken the overall coalition backing Ukraine.
Another dimension to consider, Julia, is the long-term diplomatic implications for global alliances. Countries in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East also monitor U.S. actions closely. Strong support from Trump signals that America remains a reliable global partner, capable of leading coalitions and influencing outcomes. Conversely, perceived weakness or indecision could encourage other nations to test boundaries, pursue opportunistic policies, or reconsider their strategic partnerships. The ripple effects of one meeting, therefore, extend far beyond Europe, affecting global diplomacy and international credibility.
Adam, we also need to consider the influence on neighboring countries in Eastern Europe. Nations like Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states rely on both NATO and US support for security guarantees. Any clear affirmation of American backing during the Trump-Zelensky meeting reassures these countries that they are protected, reducing the risk of panic or overreaction. However, ambiguity could cause uncertainty, leading to increased military spending, border mobilization, or other precautionary measures, which could escalate regional tensions unnecessarily.
And let's not forget the humanitarian dimension, Julia. European countries have been providing food, medical aid, and shelter for displaced Ukrainians. The outcome of this meeting could influence the level and speed of ongoing humanitarian support. Strong U.S. commitment often encourages Europe to step up aid, improving conditions for millions of refugees and displaced citizens. On the other hand, hesitancy or mixed signals might slow down assistance, leaving vulnerable populations at greater risk and undermining the global perception of coordinated international responsibility.
Another critical factor is the economic impact on European nations. Energy supplies, particularly natural gas, have been affected by the war, and many countries are dependent on stability in Ukraine to maintain affordable energy prices. Strong support from Trump might stabilize European markets by reassuring investors and signaling a coherent strategy to manage disruptions. Weak or inconsistent signals could increase volatility, raising prices for energy and food, straining European economies, and fueling political debates that challenge unity and cohesion within the region.
Europe's military coordination is another aspect to consider. NATO's planning and logistics depend heavily on American leadership and clarity of commitment. If Trump demonstrates decisive support for Ukraine, NATO members are more likely to coordinate effectively, ensuring timely delivery of equipment, intelligence sharing, and joint strategic planning. However, ambiguity in Washington can create gaps in coordination, reduce the efficiency of joint operations, and even undermine trust among alliance members, affecting both Ukraine's defense and broader regional security.
And Adam, beyond Europe, other global allies such as Japan, South Korea, and Australia are also watching closely. These countries may not be directly involved militarily, but their diplomatic and economic policies can be influenced by perceived US resolve. Strong backing for Ukraine could encourage these nations to strengthen sanctions on Russia, provide humanitarian aid, or adjust trade policies to support global stability. Weak signals, however, might reduce their willingness to act, creating a fragmented response that emboldens Russia or destabilizes regional security.
We should also consider the effect on international institutions, Julia. Organizations like the United Nations, the European Union, and the World Bank are all sensitive to shifts in U.S. policy. Clear signals of support from Trump can enable these institutions to act more decisively, whether it's coordinating aid, imposing sanctions, or facilitating negotiations. Unclear or contradictory signals can delay their actions, weaken their influence, and reduce the overall effectiveness of global responses to the war, creating uncertainty that affects both diplomacy and humanitarian efforts.
Adam, one more layer is public perception globally. Citizens in allied countries are observing how the United States engages with Ukraine. Strong commitment from Trump reassures people that their governments are acting responsibly, potentially reducing fear, panic, or civil unrest. Mixed or weak signals could create doubt and uncertainty, impacting public opinion and potentially influencing policy decisions in ways that complicate the international response to the conflict. Public confidence and political stability are crucial factors in the success of Allied strategies.
Finally, Julia, the Trump-Zelensky meeting highlights how deeply interconnected global alliances are. Decisions made in Washington influence not only Ukraine, but also European and global security, economic stability, humanitarian outcomes, and public confidence. Every word, gesture, and commitment has consequences across continents. For allies, clarity and coordination are key to ensuring that strategic, economic, and humanitarian goals are achieved efficiently. The ripple effects of this meeting will continue to shape international relations for months, if not years.
So, dear listeners, as we reflect on the reactions of Europe and global allies, think about all the layers: security guarantees, economic stability, humanitarian aid, public perception, and alliance coordination. One meeting, one conversation, and one set of decisions can ripple across the world, influencing policy, strategy, and daily life. We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think Europe and other allies will respond? And what impact might it have on global stability in the near future?
Julia, as we examine the Trump-Zelensky meeting, it's essential to consider the potential scenarios that could unfold from this diplomatic encounter. The meeting itself sets the tone for both immediate and long-term developments in the conflict. Depending on the commitments made, the tone of the discussion, and the reactions of allies and adversaries, we could see a variety of outcomes ranging from escalation to negotiation. Each scenario carries significant implications for Ukraine, the United States, Europe, and the global balance of power.
That's right, Adam. One scenario is a strong show of US support, where Trump pledges increased military aid, financial backing, and political solidarity. In this case, Ukraine would likely feel empowered to strengthen its defenses and push for strategic gains on the battlefield. This could deter Russia from taking aggressive actions or force them to reconsider their operational strategies. European allies might also increase their assistance, creating a coordinated front that enhances stability and sends a clear message to adversaries.
Conversely, another scenario is a more cautious approach by Trump, where the commitments are measured, conditional, or deliberately vague. This could create uncertainty in Ukraine about the level of support they can rely on. Russia might interpret such signals as an opportunity to intensify operations, test Ukrainian defenses, or apply pressure through political and economic means. European nations may hesitate in providing further aid, leading to gaps in coordination, logistical delays, and potential instability in the region.
Another potential outcome involves a push for negotiations. Trump could encourage Zelensky to engage in talks with Russia to explore ceasefire options or peace agreements. While this could reduce immediate conflict and save lives, it might also require Ukraine to make concessions that could be politically and strategically challenging. Zelensky would need to weigh the benefits of potential peace against the risk of territorial or sovereignty compromises. The international community, including Europe and global allies, would closely scrutinize such negotiations for fairness and long-term viability.
Julia, we should also consider the long-term strategic implications. A strong U.S. commitment could strengthen Ukraine's international position, improve confidence among allies, and provide a foundation for post-war reconstruction. It could reinforce NATO's credibility and send a deterrent signal to other potential aggressors worldwide. On the other hand, inconsistent or hesitant messaging from Trump might weaken alliances, embolden adversaries, and create uncertainty that prolongs the conflict, destabilizes regional security, and disrupts global economic and diplomatic networks.
Exactly, Adam. And the human dimension remains central in all scenarios. Millions of Ukrainians have endured displacement, trauma, and insecurity. The outcomes of this meeting influence their access to protection, humanitarian aid, and essential resources. Strong support could accelerate the delivery of assistance and reinforce civilian safety, while hesitancy could slow aid, exacerbate suffering, and diminish hope. For both Ukraine and the international community, prioritizing humanitarian outcomes is as critical as military and political strategy.
Another factor is the potential impact on Russia's internal politics. Depending on how Moscow interprets the Trump-Zelensky meeting, Putin might adjust his strategy to maintain political legitimacy at home. Strong U.S. support could force Moscow into a defensive posture, limit aggressive actions, or even push for negotiations. Conversely, perceived U.S. hesitation might allow Putin to project strength domestically, justify risky military actions, or apply political pressure on Ukraine and neighboring nations. These domestic considerations are tightly linked to global outcomes.
And Adam, we must not overlook the broader geopolitical ripple effects. Countries outside Europe, such as China, India, and nations in the Middle East, are also observing closely. They will interpret the meeting's results in the context of their own strategic interests. A decisive U.S. stance could reinforce global norms, discourage opportunistic actions, and strengthen alliances. Ambiguous signals could encourage strategic maneuvering by other powers, creating regional tensions or shifting global alignments in unexpected ways, with far-reaching consequences.
There is also the economic dimension, Julia. The conflict already affects global energy markets, food supplies, and international trade. A strong U.S. commitment could stabilize markets by signaling coordinated international action, ensuring the continuation of grain exports, energy supplies, and financial support. Hesitant or unclear signals could increase market volatility, disrupt trade, and heighten uncertainty for countries dependent on stability in Europe and Ukraine. Economic consequences, therefore, are tightly intertwined with political and military decisions.
Another scenario to consider is the symbolic impact. Regardless of immediate actions, the meeting itself communicates intentions, priorities, and alliances. Strong visual and verbal affirmations of support can reassure allies, deter adversaries, and strengthen public confidence. Mixed signals, however, could lead to misinterpretations, erode trust, and reduce the perceived credibility of both the United States and Ukraine on the global stage. The symbolic value of leadership, diplomacy, and commitment cannot be underestimated in this context.
Finally, Julia, the Trump-Zelensky meeting is a defining moment because it integrates military, diplomatic, economic, humanitarian, and symbolic factors into a single point of influence. Each scenario carries consequences across multiple domains, affecting strategy, alliances, civilian populations, markets, and global stability. The world is watching closely because even small decisions can create ripple effects that shape the trajectory of the war, the credibility of international institutions, and the balance of global power for years to come.
So, dear listeners, as we think about potential scenarios and outcomes, remember that the implications of this meeting extend far beyond Washington and Kyiv. Every decision, word, and signal has consequences for Ukraine, Russia, Europe, global allies, markets, and millions of people whose lives are directly affected by this war. We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. Which scenario do you believe is most likely, and how might it shape the future of the war and international relations globally?
Julia, as we reach the conclusion of our discussion on the Trump-Zelensky meeting, it's essential to reflect on the broader significance and the lessons that can be drawn. This meeting is not just a political event. It is a pivotal moment with far-reaching implications for military strategy, diplomacy, global economics, alliances, and human lives. The decisions made, the promises exchanged, and the signals sent will shape not only the immediate situation in Ukraine, but also the trajectory of international relations for months and possibly years.
Absolutely, Adam. One of the primary takeaways is the importance of clarity and decisiveness in leadership. Strong commitments from both Trump and Zelensky can inspire confidence, strengthen alliances, and enhance the effectiveness of military, diplomatic, and economic strategies. Conversely, ambiguity or hesitation can create uncertainty, embolden adversaries, and potentially slow progress toward resolving the conflict. For world leaders and citizens alike, understanding this dynamic is critical for interpreting global events accurately.
Another key lesson is the interconnectedness of global actions. Military decisions, diplomatic negotiations, economic strategies, and humanitarian aid are all intertwined. What may seem like a small gesture or statement during this meeting can ripple across continents, influencing markets, alliances, regional stability, and public perception. Citizens and policymakers alike must recognize that no country acts in isolation, and every decision carries multiple layers of impact.
Exactly, Adam. We also learned that perceptions matter as much as reality. How Russia, Europe, and other global powers interpret the meeting can be as influential as the tangible commitments made. Strong signaling can act as a deterrent, encouraging cautious behavior from adversaries. Weak or inconsistent messaging can create openings for escalation or opportunistic actions. This underscores the importance of strategic communication and the careful management of both words and actions on the international stage.
And Julia, the human dimension remains central to everything we've discussed. Millions of Ukrainians are directly affected by the outcomes of this meeting, whether through access to protection, humanitarian assistance, or safety on the front lines. Decisions regarding military support, economic aid, and diplomatic engagement all ultimately influence the daily lives of civilians. This highlights why diplomacy is not just an abstract exercise. It has tangible consequences for real people who are enduring hardship, uncertainty, and danger.
Another takeaway is the influence of global allies. Europe, Asia, and other regions closely monitor US actions, and their responses are often contingent on clear and decisive leadership. Strong US support can reinforce NATO unity, encourage coordinated humanitarian efforts, and stabilize global economic systems. Ambiguity or mixed signals, however, can create hesitation, fragmentation, or even shifts in regional alliances. This meeting demonstrates how one country's leadership can influence collective international behavior.
We should also consider the long-term strategic implications. Beyond immediate military or political outcomes, the meeting can shape the credibility of international institutions, the perception of U.S. leadership, and the global balance of power. Clear and strong commitments from Trump and Zelensky could strengthen deterrence, reinforce alliances, and prepare the international community for post-war reconstruction. Conversely, weak or unclear outcomes could create instability, embolden adversaries, and slow progress toward resolution.
Adam, another insight is the symbolic power of diplomacy. Beyond concrete agreements, the meeting communicates priorities, intentions, and leadership qualities to the world. A successful meeting can reassure allies, deter adversaries, and inspire public confidence. Mixed signals, however, can erode trust, create confusion, and reduce the perceived credibility of both the United States and Ukraine. Symbolism matters because perception often shapes policy, decision-making, and even public morale.
Additionally, economic and humanitarian consequences are tightly intertwined with political decisions. Energy markets, global trade, financial stability, and refugee assistance all depend on coordinated international action. Strong, decisive leadership can stabilize markets, ensure timely aid, and improve regional and global confidence. Weakness, ambiguity, or delayed commitments can increase volatility, strain resources, and exacerbate human suffering. This reinforces the point that leadership in diplomacy is inseparable from economic and humanitarian considerations.
And finally, Adam, the Trump-Zelensky meeting is a reminder of the complexity of international relations. Military, diplomatic, economic, and humanitarian factors are all interdependent. Every action taken, every statement made, and every commitment offered reverberates globally, influencing strategy, alliances, and public perception. For citizens watching, this meeting is an opportunity to understand the nuanced, interconnected nature of global politics and the profound impact leadership decisions have on real lives and international stability.
So, dear listeners, as we conclude, let's reflect on the key lessons. Clarity and decisiveness are essential in leadership. Global actions are deeply interconnected. Perceptions matter as much as reality. Allies play a crucial role. Human consequences are central, and symbolism and communication can influence outcomes as much as material support. This meeting is more than a political encounter. It is a moment that can shape the war's direction, alliances, global economics, and the lives of millions.
We encourage you, dear listeners, to share your opinions in the comments. Tell us where you are listening from and what you think will be the most significant outcome of this meeting. How do you believe it will influence the war, global alliances, and international relations in the coming months? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel, The English Globe, to stay updated with detailed analyses of current events and global developments. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these in-depth discussions to life. Another scenario to consider is the symbolic impact. Regardless of immediate actions, the meeting itself communicates intentions, priorities, and alliances. Strong visual and verbal affirmations of support can reassure allies, deter adversaries, and strengthen public confidence. Mixed signals, however, could lead to misinterpretations, erode trust, and reduce the perceived credibility of both the United States and Ukraine on the global stage. The symbolic value of leadership, diplomacy, and commitment cannot be underestimated in this context.
Finally, Julia, the Trump-Zelensky meeting is a defining moment because it integrates military, diplomatic, economic, humanitarian, and symbolic factors into a single point of influence. Each scenario carries consequences across multiple domains, affecting strategy, alliances, civilian populations, markets, and global stability. The world is watching closely because even small decisions can create ripple effects that shape the trajectory of the war, the credibility of international institutions, and the balance of global power for years to come.
So, dear listeners, as we think about potential scenarios and outcomes, remember that the implications of this meeting extend far beyond Washington and Kyiv. Every decision, word, and signal has consequences for Ukraine, Russia, Europe, global allies, markets, and millions of people whose lives are directly affected by this war. We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. Which scenario do you believe is most likely, and how might it shape the future of the war and international relations globally?
Julia, as we reach the conclusion of our discussion on the Trump-Zelensky meeting, it's essential to reflect on the broader significance and the lessons that can be drawn. This meeting is not just a political event. It is a pivotal moment with far-reaching implications for military strategy, diplomacy, global economics, alliances, and human lives. The decisions made, the promises exchanged, and the signals sent will shape not only the immediate situation in Ukraine, but also the trajectory of international relations for months and possibly years.
Absolutely, Adam. One of the primary takeaways is the importance of clarity and decisiveness in leadership. Strong commitments from both Trump and Zelensky can inspire confidence, strengthen alliances, and enhance the effectiveness of military, diplomatic, and economic strategies. Conversely, ambiguity or hesitation can create uncertainty, embolden adversaries, and potentially slow progress toward resolving the conflict. For world leaders and citizens alike, understanding this dynamic is critical for interpreting global events accurately.
Another key lesson is the interconnectedness of global actions. Military decisions, diplomatic negotiations, economic strategies, and humanitarian aid are all intertwined. What may seem like a small gesture or statement during this meeting can ripple across continents, influencing markets, alliances, regional stability, and public perception. Citizens and policymakers alike must recognize that no country acts in isolation, and every decision carries multiple layers of impact.
Exactly, Adam. We also learned that perceptions matter as much as reality. How Russia, Europe, and other global powers interpret the meeting can be as influential as the tangible commitments made. Strong signaling can act as a deterrent, encouraging cautious behavior from adversaries. Weak or inconsistent messaging can create openings for escalation or opportunistic actions. This underscores the importance of strategic communication and the careful management of both words and actions on the international stage.
And Julia, the human dimension remains central to everything we've discussed. Millions of Ukrainians are directly affected by the outcomes of this meeting, whether through access to protection, humanitarian assistance, or safety on the front lines. Decisions regarding military support, economic aid, and diplomatic engagement all ultimately influence the daily lives of civilians. This highlights why diplomacy is not just an abstract exercise. It has tangible consequences for real people who are enduring hardship, uncertainty, and danger.
Another takeaway is the influence of global allies. Europe, Asia, and other regions closely monitor US actions, and their responses are often contingent on clear and decisive leadership. Strong US support can reinforce NATO unity, encourage coordinated humanitarian efforts, and stabilize global economic systems. Ambiguity or mixed signals, however, can create hesitation, fragmentation, or even shifts in regional alliances. This meeting demonstrates how one country's leadership can influence collective international behavior.
We should also consider the long-term strategic implications. Beyond immediate military or political outcomes, the meeting can shape the credibility of international institutions, the perception of U.S. leadership, and the global balance of power. Clear and strong commitments from Trump and Zelensky could strengthen deterrence, reinforce alliances, and prepare the international community for post-war reconstruction. Conversely, weak or unclear outcomes could create instability, embolden adversaries, and slow progress toward resolution.
Adam. Another insight is the symbolic power of diplomacy. Beyond concrete agreements, the meeting communicates priorities, intentions, and leadership qualities to the world. A successful meeting can reassure allies, deter adversaries, and inspire public confidence. Mixed signals, however, can erode trust, create confusion, and reduce the perceived credibility of both the United States and Ukraine. Symbolism matters because perception often shapes policy, decision-making, and even public morale.
Additionally, economic and humanitarian consequences are tightly intertwined with political decisions. Energy markets, global trade, financial stability, and refugee assistance all depend on coordinated international action. Strong, decisive leadership can stabilize markets, ensure timely aid, and improve regional and global confidence. Weakness, ambiguity, or delayed commitments can increase volatility, strain resources, and exacerbate human suffering. This reinforces the point that leadership in diplomacy is inseparable from economic and humanitarian considerations.
And finally, Adam. The Trump-Zelensky meeting is a reminder of the complexity of international relations. Military, diplomatic, economic, and humanitarian factors are all interdependent. Every action taken, every statement made, and every commitment offered reverberates globally, influencing strategy, alliances, and public perception. For citizens watching, this meeting is an opportunity to understand the nuanced, interconnected nature of global politics and the profound impact leadership decisions have on real lives and international stability.
So, dear listeners, as we conclude, let's reflect on the key lessons. Clarity and decisiveness are essential in leadership. Global actions are deeply interconnected. Perceptions matter as much as reality. Allies play a crucial role. Human consequences are central, and symbolism and communication can influence outcomes as much as material support. This meeting is more than a political encounter. It is a moment that can shape the war's direction, alliances, global economics, and the lives of millions.
We encourage you, dear listeners, to share your opinions in the comments. Tell us where you are listening from and what you think will be the most significant outcome of this meeting. How do you believe it will influence the war, global alliances, and international relations in the coming months? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel, The English Globe, to stay updated with detailed analyses of current events and global developments. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these in-depth discussions to life.